Taxpayer Talks is brought to you by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility and is made possible by generous donations from listeners like you. If you want to support our work, you can visit texastaxpayers.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution today. Thank you.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to Taxpayer Talks. My name is 𝗚𝗪𝗠𝗠𝗏, president of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. I am here with Jeremy Kitchen. Happy Texas Independence Day, Jeremy. How are you doing?
Yeah, happy Texas Independence Day. Doing great.
Good. Well, it's kind of been a slow week, but we have had some news this week. We've had some news on Chapter 313 renewal. Of course, we're not supposed to use that phrase apparently, but why don't you talk about what has transpired?
Yeah, so this week we had another bill in the Texas House of Representatives. This one, a priority of House Speaker 𝗙𝗓𝗪𝗏 in the form of House Bill 5, get announced. This is a complete replacement of the Chapter 313 corporate welfare program in Texas. Obviously, for avid listeners to our content, people that maybe read our material, we talk about this all the time, right? The largest corporate welfare program in the state of Texas, the Chapter 313 tax abatement program, was ended December of last year. We, of course, have heard over the course of the year leading up to the legislative session that Republicans, specifically Republican leadership in the House, was working on reviving it. We've now seen two bills. We talked about, of course, the bill that was filed in mid-February, I guess on the last week's or the episode before that. But this week we have a new bill, House Bill 5, a priority bill by House Speaker 𝗙𝗓𝗪𝗏, authored by Republican State Representative Todd Hunter out of Corpus Christi. And if you kind of read through the bill, ultimately it seems to replace the Chapter 313 tax abatement program for all intents and purposes. It works slightly different. However, the notable difference is that it does not appear to incorporate kind of the green energy subsidies that were previously found in the 313 tax abatement program. Now, the assumption there, right, is that that was like the major objection from a lot of lawmakers when they were trying to renew it last session, specifically some of the Republican lawmakers. And so the assumption would be that this is a way to bring them on board. And so, yeah, figure we can talk more in depth about that. You have kind of the decks being stacked against taxpayers in this regard, unfortunately. And so it's been a big week kind of focused on that.
Yeah, I think, we've talked about this multiple times. We knew that in some form this was going to at least be filed. I think what I'm surprised by is it's a priority for the House, right? I did not expect it to be a priority, and honestly did not expect to see such aggressive rhetoric by Abbott and by Phelan. And, Patrick kind of commented on it. I think there's been some people in the Senate who have said, hey, if the renewables aren't in there. But what's very apparent is one, all of the rumors that we heard about this thing coming back, and specifically that, they're going to exempt, green energy from it, and that's how they're going to sell it. All of those have proven to be true. And of course, we've mentioned in the past that the other rumor, right, is they're going to usher it through the process. And then once we get to conference committee or later in the process, they're going to shove those green energies right back in. So I'll be interested to see if, we're still 100% with these rumors and what it's going to happen. And like you said, it's really disappointing with, I think it's funny that they're saying, hey, we're not calling it Chapter 313 because it's like a bad word, right? Likely because, the grassroots activists know what this thing is, and they know it's corporate welfare. And so we're using, euphemisms like, taxpayer incentives. But the reality is, this is a revival of Chapter 313s. This is corporate welfare, and we are once again here where they are preparing to give another push to steal billions from taxpayers and give to multinational corporations. And the crazy thing about that, and I know you've mentioned it in a recent article, I've mentioned it, is the most recent study we had on Chapter 313s, only 15% of them even care that it even matters for they stay in Texas. So clearly the corporate lobby has gotten to Abbott and gotten to a lot of these legislators who are pushing this because taxpayers do not want it. Republicans who have a majority in both chambers, their platform explicitly says we do not want this. And so they are going against reason, they are going against good economic policy, and they are going against their own party to do this. And it's just disappointing to see.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's bipartisan agreement in this too. The Democrat platform is also opposed to corporate welfare, right? Pitting communities against one another. And of course, it's only Republicans and Democrats that make up the legislature. And so you have to assume, like, whose interests do they have at heart? Not to mention, of course, that, and we've talked about this several times, but in a legislative session, when you have Texas taxpayers, individual taxpayers and businesses all crying about the property tax, instead of providing, using, exploiting the historic opportunity that exists with the surplus to provide tangible property tax relief, put us on a path to the elimination of the tax, the legislature seems hell-bent, right, on reviving a program that will only shift the burden to individual taxpayers, right, increase their property tax burdens at the expense in support of these large multinational corporations. It's truly just a travesty and shameful, and taxpayers should certainly demand better from their lawmakers, who very obviously are not hearing enough from them, right, on this issue. When we talk about the kind of the groundswell of issues surrounding just property tax, government spending, what have you, in general. I'll say, I mentioned the deck was stacked against taxpayers. The day this was filed, I think Tuesday this week, right? Almost instantaneously, like within an hour, it also had maxed out joint authors, right? And what's important about that, the 4 additional authors that attached their name to the bill, is 2 of those authors were committee chairmen by which this bill will go through, right? So one of the joint authors is State Representative Morgan Meyer out of Dallas, Republican, who's the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee by which this will go through, right? And then you've also got State Representative Dustin Burrows, a Republican out of Lubbock, who chairs the Calendars Committee. Of course, this bill, once it's passed out of the committee, will go to get scheduled. That's a signal, right? That's a signal to kind of all the other members and everything that the deck stacked, that the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. This is going to happen, at least on the House side, right? Now, the unknown, and you kind of mentioned this very briefly, right, is where the Senate is on this. Of course, the Senate's opposition to reviving this last session was, according to Dan Patrick, because it was a system gone amok. There's a bunch of corruption, and it was green energy, or like the green subsidies, right? And so if that's out of it, it's kind of unclear whether it's going to happen. The last thing I'll mention on this, right, is that you had Governor Abbott in his State of the State address. He did not make it an official emergency item, but he started off the State of the State address talking about the importance of giving local governments incentives, economic incentives, right? Which is basically this, right? What we're talking about here. Yesterday, on Wednesday, he held a press conference where he touted, I think it was the 11th, right, Governor's Cup that Texas was recognized for, because we bring so much business and individuals, right, projects into the state. And even though he didn't explicitly say, I support this bill, in a question that followed the press conference, he specifically mentioned, right, his support for, well, if it doesn't have the green subsidies in it, I'd be supportive, right? And to me, that tells you that all the dominoes are starting to stack up, and Texas taxpayers should be concerned.
Yeah, I think, where TFR is going to come in. Of course, we have a record vote that we scored last go around on this, and this 313 renewal is specifically what I'm talking about, and it failed to renew. And so we have a lot of these legislators on record that they oppose this. So as time progresses throughout session, as we see more co-authors starting to join that bill, we will be paying close attention to who rises up in opposition. Is the Freedom Caucus going to rise up in opposition to this? I think 𝗓𝗡r has been vocal against this program, right? And so we will see, who's going to kind of go against the current and buck up against this and hold the party line on both parties. Right? Are there any Democrats that are going to stand up and say, hey, our voters don't want corporate welfare? Which Republicans are going to stand up and say, our voters don't want corporate welfare? Who is going to ignore their base and placate the lobby and corporate interests? And so we will be highlighting this throughout session. We will be following it throughout the process. And we will certainly be letting people who flipped, right, who were opposed to it last go round, but all of a sudden now are supporting it. And the reverse. Hey, if someone supported last go round and opposed it this time, that's what we do. We provide transparency. And so check us out. Hey, subscribe to our emails. We will keep you updated on exactly what's going on these big issues. Speaking of another big issue, of course, property taxes is always at the forefront of what we are doing. We've made it a priority for our organization, and there is a lot of chatter and a lot of different bills dealing with different things in the legislature. Let's first talk about the Senate and the homestead exemption increase, Jeremy.
Yeah, so yesterday or the day before, right, it was a Senate Bill 3, Senate Joint Resolution 3 were both filed. This is a priority of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's, as he announced, I guess, almost a month ago now. It had not been filed until now. I think the big takeaway here, right, is he's made no secret that he supports increasing the homestead exemption from its current threshold of $40,000 to that of $70,000, right? So that's a $30,000 increase. We've talked about several times, right? The concern there, because they've done this several times in the past, right, is that almost instantaneously, and maybe not this cycle, but in the next few cycles, right, that $30,000 number will likely be eaten up, right, by appraisal creep, inflation, and everything else. And so in the past, this has provided virtually no property tax relief to Texas taxpayers, right? And if it does, it's been seldom, right? Few and far between for folks. And it's nothing more, frankly, than kind of a trinket, right? A gimmick for taxpayers to make it look as if they're providing property tax relief. If you're someone who qualifies for a homestead exemption, you probably appreciate it to some extent, right? But if you don't benefit from that, you only get the increased burden, right? That's how that works. It completely shifts that burden. The concerning thing about this, not that I think TFR is outwardly opposed to this. We think compression is a far superior strategy when it comes to property tax relief. But as soon as this was filed, it was filed with the co-authorship of all 31 senators, right? And the important takeaway there is, the verdict's in, right? This is the Senate's approach to property tax relief this session, right? If anything else gets filed, it's likely just, for the sake of filing it and for the narrative, but not necessarily to actually pursue it. And I think this sets up certainly kind of the holy war, if you will, between the Senate and the House, where it seems like the House might be focused on other aspects of property tax relief and reform. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But if you're a Texas taxpayer who was, encouraged that the Senate was going to address it, it seems like that, they're going to address homestead exemption increases only.
Yeah, I think you said it best when, we're not necessarily going to oppose anytime you're going to give, some sort of property tax relief. But our case certainly is that this is one of the weakest forms of relief. It's one that is designed as a gimmick to, make people feel better, but it will disappear very quickly within the next year or two with inflation and appraisal raises. Even with, them kind of with a multi-point attack, in the House, we're going to talk about kind of something 𝗡𝗏𝗏 said about appraisal reform. Ultimately, it's an immoral tax.
Do you hate property taxes and want to actually own your home? Please like and subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications so you're aware of future videos on how we can eliminate property taxes in Texas.
Right. And it drives me crazy because anytime, we talk to voters, when we go speak, when we ask the question, is it moral, to tax people's property perpetually and pay rent to the government? No one says that. And the vast majority of lawmakers, when you pose it in that way, of course, they oppose it. And Abbott has come out and said in years back saying, hey, listen, yeah, property taxes are immoral. You can't own your house. We need to eliminate them. He came out and said in the last campaign with Beta, we've said many, many times, right? His goal was to eliminate, right? And so why in this realm, when you talk about other rights, right? When we're talking about private property rights here, right? When you talk about gun rights, pro-abortion rights, right? Pro-life rights, right? Why is there like this galvanized, no compromise mentality, right? Like Roe ended up pretty much abolishing abortion in Texas, right? Because we had a trigger law, and there's, of course, there's a huge movement to just outright abolish abortion, and there's probably a little still work there. But why do we refuse to make compromises there? when it comes to the Second Amendment, why do we refuse to make compromises there? Because, to take away someone's right to defense, it is immoral, right? And so the same thing applies to private property. It is immoral to not allow someone to own their own property. And so why do we have these weak, status quo solutions that continue to, perpetuate the problem that we are not allowed to own our property under the current system, but our lawmakers in both chambers and our governor is satisfied with just throwing a Band-Aid, right? Slow the growth, losing status quo mentality to get them by through the next election cycle. And then we're going to rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And in 2 years, if we don't put ourselves on a path to elimination, we are going to be here again talking about homestead exemption increases to $100,000. And we're going to add another $5 billion in compression, but we're not going to put ourselves on a path to elimination. At some point, we have to stand up as voters and taxpayers and say enough is enough and hold these people accountable. And if you value the right to private property, understand that perpetual property taxes, paying rent to the government it's immoral, and it is the one thing that stands in between you and the right to actually own your property. And at some point, we have to wake up and stop compromising and accepting these gimmicks from the legislature.
I think the last thing I would say on this, right, is I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. I think the frustration, the travesty of all of this, right, is that the lead up to the legislative session, you had the comptroller, Glenn Hager, you had Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. They've all said this is a historic opportunity. And they're right. It is a historic opportunity. We likely won't see this large of a budget surplus, right, in any time in the near future, right? And they have an opportunity to not only provide relief, right, to kind of go past and beyond these trinkets, right, continuing to slow the growth. They have an opportunity to provide tangible property tax relief to Texas taxpayers this cycle. And they also, right, even more of an opportunity to put us on a path to its elimination, right? That would be the ultimate, to get back to the economic incentives, right? The ultimate economic incentive is to do what? Provide property tax relief and an out for everyone here. Imagine the economic engine that would produce here in Texas. We'd be unstoppable. No other state would be able to compete with us, right? You'd continue to bring in individuals and businesses who realize they don't have to pay this tax coming here. It's a travesty that our lawmakers, right, want to perpetuate the same immoral system and not end it. And they have the opportunity to do so this legislative session.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And kind of speaking of what else is going on in the House, Phelan recently spoke. And he basically said, hey, we've increased this to 17%, right? 17 billion from 15 billion. We're not exactly sure what he means by that. We haven't crunched the numbers. He spoke that in the same breath as basically lowering the appraisal cap, right? The 10% cap on homesteaded homes down to 5%. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, that he wants to apply that to all homes, right? So not just homesteaded homes. And so likely this is where he's getting that number. We have not verified that just yet. And we knew that the House was going to be focusing on appraisal reform. And so it seems as though this is going to be the thing they galvanize behind, which is, lowering from 10% to 5%. And yet again, hey, we're not going to oppose this, right? Any step forward we can make in property tax relief, we're going to support, but we're also going to have a higher standard. Right. And we're going to continue standing on the fact that this system is immoral. And so yet again, although, this is a reform we can get behind, we would get a lot more behind it if we did this in addition to, supporting something like Schaefer's bill or Kane's bill, right, that would put us on an actual path to elimination. I think that's a lot more practical, and that's a lot more fair to taxpayers that, we simultaneously can put ourselves on a path to M&O elimination specifically first, and also have these other reforms as well. And we have a long-term goal that leads to actual victory, right, for voters, where we know that eventually we're on a path towards Texans actually being able to own your home. And we would be, like you said, the only state in the union that has that. If we want to talk about financial and economic incentives, there is no greater incentive than, hey, come to Texas And you can actually own your home, and you do not have to pay perpetual rent to the government. And so I don't understand either why, representatives on both sides of the aisle that say they believe in something like private property rights continually show through their actions that they in fact don't actually believe that, or at bare minimum, it's not a very high priority for them. And so we have to continue to trumpet this narrative. We have to continue to let our representatives know, to interact with our lawmakers and demand that they give us the ability to own our home. And if they do not do that, then we have to hold them accountable, not only, in the legislative session, but we have to hold them accountable in campaign season as well. And if someone's not willing to let me own my house because they refuse to put us on a path towards elimination and to just do these, very weak, gimmicky property tax relief schemes, well, then you're going to lose my support as a voter. And I would encourage other people as well. I've said many times lately when I'm speaking that, it doesn't matter what your issue is, whether it's, the gender modification thing, whether it's pro-life issues, government can only do what we fund it to do. And so this is why the budget, and this is why fiscal policy, in my opinion, and I would assume you agree since we both work for a fiscal organization, right, is the core of limiting government for all of these things. A government cannot push woke ideology on you if they're not funded and paying people to do that. And so when we show fiscal restraint and we reduce the size of the government and we zero out, agencies that are pushing these things, that is the key to prosperity, and that is the key to limited government. And I think more people need to wake up that, hey, if you are, passionate about, the border, passionate about election integrity, or passionate about, pro-life issues, the underlying cause of that is we are giving government too much money, and we have, quintupled our budget, in the last 20 years or so. And so we need to start focusing on fiscal policy more as a state.
Well said. The what you alluded to, Phelan, doing earlier, of course, that was announced today. It's going to take the form of House Bill 2. As of right now, I just checked. As of this recording, it has not actually been filed yet. But our understanding, right, is, to your point, it would take the percentage really appraisal, right, limit down from 10 to 5 and apply to everyone and not just folks that qualify for the homestead exemption. And of course, he's, touting a $17 billion number, I believe, on top of the $15 billion we've talked about previous times, right? And then I think he even went on to say something to the effect of, this is definitely the largest property tax cut in Texas history, and basically it can't be disputed, even though, for avid listeners of us, we've disputed this already several times, and that technically, once you incorporate inflation and everything, the largest property tax cut in Texas history would actually be right about 20 billion. But, semantics. I mean, to be clear, I think our position on this is, especially when it comes to the budget surplus, is use all or as much as possible, right, to not only provide property tax or tangible property tax relief, but put us on a path to its elimination.
Yeah. Well said as well. That is the goal. We want as much of that surplus paying down on property taxes and giving taxpayers relief as possible. Of course, we're at the very tail end of this kind of lull period. I expect in the next week or so that the House is going to join the Senate and really, firing up their committees. And so we're about to get to kind of the action-oriented part of the session. And so I would assume this week, maybe next week, will be kind of our last slow week as they slowly ramp up the committees and start kicking, bills to calendars. And so, of course, we will be paying attention. I highly encourage any of our listeners to go sign up and subscribe to not only our fiscal note, but to vote notices, because we're going to start putting out vote notices here very soon, letting you know what is coming to the House, whether we oppose it or whether we support it, why we oppose or support it, and we give as much objective evidence as possible to give you a good idea of who is voting to grow government and who is voting to limit government. That is the mission of our organization. Anything I've missed, Jeremy?
I don't think so. The bill filing deadline is next Friday. And I think, for those that are interested, if you're on Twitter, our Twitter Spaces podcast, our audio podcast on Monday, I think we're going to focus on, for taxpayer purposes, what's been filed, what hasn't been filed, what's good, bad, that sort of thing. So if you're interested in that, tune in Monday at 9 a.m.
All right. Hey, we appreciate y'all. Thank you for tuning in. Look forward to another Taxpayer Talks next Thursday. Y'all have a good one.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. For even more content, head over to our website, TexasTaxpayers.com, where you can find all of our written content, the Fiscal Responsibility Index, and a whole host of resources that can help you navigate the already ongoing 88th legislative session. Make sure while you're there to subscribe to the Fiscal Note and vote notices to stay informed about issues that affect your wallet. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that way you're notified next time we post a video and update to the channel. Thanks again.